this privilege that we've been given is waning. When you see the weaponization of the dollar, it is hastening the demise of the dollar, and I think you will see a lot of extra dollars floating around or flooding back home, looking for a home that are now needed to purchase oil that won't be needed.
I wanted to give you a chance to give us a quick update on what you're looking at strategically in the financial world, specifically about de-dollarization pressures. We're certainly aware as Americans directly of the dilution of our currency, the U.S. dollar, overprinting, over expansion of the currency supply, and how that's driving inflation and destroying purchasing power of anything we have in dollars, like savings accounts, checking accounts, earnings, pensions, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a bigger picture than that globally about the dollar and the world pivoting away from the dollar, including Russia and Nigeria and Saudi Arabia. You and I were just talking about that. Could you tell us what you're watching in terms of some of these major geopolitical pivots away from the U.S. dollar?
Yeah, well, for the last 50 years, it's been the petrodollar system that has allowed this country to live beyond our means, and it's very easy, I think, for most people to take that for granted. But I have a feeling that this privilege that we've been given is waning. When you see the weaponization of the dollar, it is hastening the demise of the dollar, and I think you will see a lot of extra dollars floating around or flooding back home, looking for a home that are now needed to purchase oil that won't be needed. When you see Nigeria sign, well, let's go back. Oftentimes I can be redundant in the things that I say, and maybe that's bad, or maybe it's not. Maybe I try to drill a point home. In many of the podcasts I've done since this last September, all I talk about is supply chain and the effects of Russia signing a joint military cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia and Nigeria. That's when it started. And it became very obvious to me that when you have been given the world reserve currency status for a protection of the Saudi kingdom, and you see another military superpower do the exact same thing 50 years later, it became very obvious to me that the end of the dollar as the singular world reserve currency was at hand. You got Fed Chairman Powell, who came out just a few weeks ago, right after that happened, and said, yeah, there's probably room for two world reserve currencies, almost as if he is acquiescing to this reality. The day after Saudi Arabia signed this deal with Russia, Russia signed it with Nigeria, the two biggest OPEC producing countries in the world. And when that happened, it was very, very, very obvious to me that this was happening. And then, of course, the day after that, Russia announces that they were outfitting their nuclear submarines with hypersonic ICBMs. Their way of saying, don't try to do the Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi end around on us, wouldn't end well. And you could see this was chess pieces moving. And the lack of media coverage in this country is just it's astounding to me, because a couple, I don't know how many days ago, a week, 2 weeks ago, Nigeria inked this deal with China. They will now sell their oil to the Chinese in yuan. Secondly, it was announced that Saudi Arabia is in negotiations with China to accept yuan for their oil. Now, one of the things that we've talked about before is the Shanghai International Energy Exchange, where an oil producer can, participate in the world's largest market, try to capture, market share. And it sells oil or natural gas or whatnot for the petro yuan bond that is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So you're seeing a drive, and I believe that will push the petrodollar status way down the totem pole when you're going to see alternatives to the petrodollar status. And you're seeing Russia now saying that they will accept gold and or Bitcoin from unfriendly nations or rubles. They are pegging their ruble to gold right now, and at the rate that they're doing it as of just the other day worked out to about $1,610 per ounce. That's putting a floor under the price of gold. And although there was a time frame on it, they were going to honor it, I think, through June or whatnot. I think it's the beginning of the end. It's a test, and I think you're already seeing the ruble strengthen on its own considerably. But what we are witnessing without any acknowledgement from the mainstream, so the majority of the country is asleep and will wake up to a new reality that I think could very quickly be what Klaus Schwab has been talking about for a very long time. And I just want to go down this road for 1 second. If someone said to me, here's a screenplay, here's where we are, I want you to show me the Great Reset. Finish the screenplay for me. You have all of the pillars of wealth, stocks, bonds, and real estate, all inversely correlated to a rise in interest rates, all at all-time highs, all courtesy of 80% of every dollar ever created. We've always been saying 50. The new number is 80% of every dollar ever created in the history of this country was done in the last 2 years. This is what has driven the inflation. It's not corporate greed and price gouging. It's an irrational, ridiculous Federal Reserve that has created the impossible task of price discovery as money has flowed into financial assets at all-time highs, inversely correlated to a rise in interest rates. But the one piece of the puzzle that I never added to this, I always say the 3 pillars of wealth, the 4th pillar is the dollar. You are now usurping the dollar globally. We have 1 billion people roughly in the West, between Canada, U.S., and parts of Western Europe versus 7 billion people in the rest of the world. And I think that when the dollar loses its singular reserve status, seeing how weaponizing of the dollar can penalize a country, and I think when you do that, rather than allowing everyone to use the currency, but you weaponize it and choose who cannot use it, you are incentivizing these countries like China with the SIP system, cross interbank payment system, the Shanghai Gold Exchange, the Chinese petro yuan bond. All of these pieces are in place to launch a new system that will, as Fed Chairman Powell said, be a second world reserve currency. He came out and acquiesced just, a few weeks ago publicly. There is room for a second world reserve currency, he said, because he knows the handwriting is on the wall. But when this happens, the 4th pillar of wealth, dollars, collapse in value. So when you talk about a Great Reset, I never really was able to wrap my mind around it when it first came out in 2020. Yeah, sure, right. But think about it. You have everyone piled into traditional assets and stocks and bonds and real estate. And if interest rates rise, just to find equilibrium in the economy at 8% inflation, 8% on the federal funds rate would see a 10, 11, 12% 30-year mortgage, would see the bond market crater by 80% or more, and would kneecap the stock market. And if you see a flood of dollars coming home, at the same time, our foolish president wants a $5 trillion deficit this year. You have a government that is addicted to spending like a heroin addict to the needle, and you are decreasing demand exponentially in the need and or desire to own dollars, which means you create more but have less demand, the price falls, interest rates have to rise, bang, everything blows up all at once on a Monday morning simultaneously. Stocks, bonds, real estate, and the dollar all collapse. Now, could it be a movie? Sure. Could it happen? Absolutely. And I think we are closer to that happening than I ever would have given credibility for a few years ago. And when that happens, ushers in the new central bank digital currency, which is a sticky wicket of its own. But all of these things that people have been talking about that seem so far off and so implausible, with Saudi Arabia and Nigeria taking these steps to, in essence, sever the dollar relationship to oil, the hegemony that we have, I think we are witnessing history and not a very pleasant one in the making.